conducted by big business. That's military contractors, other contractors that work with the government. We have what are called fusion centers in over 30 states that bring together different levels of law enforcement, federal, local, intelligence agencies, and businesses to share information in databases about all of us. A government report criticized these centers for really being centers of incompetence, waste. They're very expensive. Another thing to be aware of is that corporations are not, like the government, bound by the strictures of the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable government searches and seizures. So you can look at businesses being kind of the long arm of the government in conducting surveillance. You know, you'll see on Law and Order, the police officer says, well, I can't go in there. But if someone in the house gets the information and hands it over, it's different if it's done with permission. Contractors are paid very lucrative salaries and contracts. In 2007, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, senior procurement executive, said that contracts with private firms comprise about 70% of their budget. The amounts are staggering. And we need to realize that corporations, by law, are bound to look after their bottom line. So that while the government is supposed to be looking after our general welfare, and again is accountable to the US Constitution, corporations aren't. And we have a revolving door between corporations and the government. It's something like 80% of 3- and 4-star retired generals and admirals leave the military and then go into private contracting. And in many cases, they then advise the government on policies. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's a conflict of interest because they want expensive contracts for their businesses. And if you know anything about the privatization of prisons in this country and healthcare in prisons, I'm sure you've heard that when we task out the healthcare of inmates, it's done to save money, to boost profits, and we have a huge number of really horrendous instances where inmates aren't getting any health care at all as a result. Telecommunications contribute to political offices, to candidates' offices. They spent nearly $53 million combined. Verizon, AT&T, and Sprint, those are the largest US telecoms, on campaign contributions from 2002 to 2012. Individual people, Senator Dianne Feinstein, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, got over $110,000 in donations from telecoms. Now, you probably know what metadata is. Metadata is the collection of our interactions through telephony data. It tells you the origin and destination numbers called, the time and duration of your call, and additional information. It doesn't give you content, and so that's why you'll hear government officials saying, oh, this doesn't invade privacy. But you have to realize, if I call an abortion clinic or a cancer clinic several times, if I visit a certain, provider, that information gives a pretty good picture of your associations. And we have analysts who look at that data and can develop a portrait about us. I mentioned the culture of government secrecy. We saw this notably when the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, said to Senator Wyden that the NSA was not collecting data on millions of Americans. And then he amended that to say not wittingly, suggesting that by accident, some metadata could be swept up during legitimate monitoring of calls with European sources or out of the country. But I think we all know that that's very misleading now. A few myths about the metadata program that the government wants you to believe is that it makes us safer. A report from the Privacy Commission that was formed years ago but that hadn't really done anything until the last year, the commission that the president convened, really criticized metadata and the NSA's gathering of information and said that they couldn't really document any notable instances in which a so-called, terrorism incident had been thwarted. And I think this kind of omnipotent surveillance on us really violates core values of privacy that the framers knew were so essential to personal liberties. Our ability to talk and associate without the government watching us. And we need transparency in the government. Unlike the model we have now, where Obama has classified more documents than any other president, where reporters can be threatened with serious crimes for revealing some of those documents, for espionage, sends a message that we have a government that doesn't want us to know what it's doing. Again, the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, it protects citizens against unreasonable search and seizures. It requires that law enforcement obtain a warrant supported by probable cause that criminal activity is afoot, that's approved by an independent magistrate or judge before they open an investigation and spy on us. So, going back to the topic sort of profiling that I suggested under metadata. You know, a few weeks ago, I bought a new book that came out about the individuals who broke into the FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania in 1971 and discovered the counterintelligence program files under Edgar Hoover. They released them, the media was all over them, public outrage ensued, and the Attorney General had to enact guidelines. At that point it was called the Levi Guidelines, to let law enforcement know when they could lawfully open an investigation. Now, after 9/11, those guidelines have diminished, if not altogether disappeared. An agent just needs to have a good faith suspicion that an investigation should be opened. So I bought the book about the people who broke into the office. And then online, you know, I purchased, I think it was A Manchurian Candidate, a great film if you haven't seen it. And I might have gone to a movie that was related to, they had at the Tribeca Film Festival a movie about the break-in to the FBI office. Now, if I'd gone to one of those, you wouldn't really know much about me. But the more incidents that a business or government knows, the more they can sort of call me, you know, politically active, anti-establishment. And groups that I'm going to call about, data aggregators that give the government this information do have profiles on us. We're all fit into a category. Upwardly mobile, about to retire, young and frisky, you know, they have all these very creative names. But we're pegged in those categories. And businesses, including the telecoms and banks and financial institutions, after the Patriot Act was passed, can be forced to hand over information about us, about our financial records, to the government, either informally, it can be compelled through subpoenas, and it can be purchased outright from what are called data aggregators. So just the way Target and other retailers track data, there are businesses like Axiom in Texas, and businesses that you might remember used to do credit reporting like TRW and Experian. Now, they still report on your credit, but largely they make their millions and millions of dollars from getting our information and selling it. They use data mining and profiling with statistical techniques and programmatic algorithms to discern relationships about us and then to assemble information and profiles. Hard times is one of the main. Extra needy for people who may not be wealthy. Zero mobility. Now, the Senate Commerce Committee has only recently started looking into data aggregators. They operate in secrecy, with impunity, they don't report, you have no way of finding out what they know about you. And the Commerce Committee issued a report a year or so ago, highly critical of them. They're investigating several of them. Their practice is conducted with no interaction with the consumers, and they often contractually limit customers, another business, say, Kmart. They limit customers from disclosing those businesses, their data sources. The committee also found that industry categories seem to focus on at-risk populations, such as the poor, the elderly. Why is that important? It raises the issue, the question, about whether that information can result in predatory business practices and discrimination, so that health insurance may be denied to someone. ChoicePoint, which is one of the big ones, has contracts with at least 35 government agencies, 8 million contract with the Department of Justice, allows FBI agents to access the company's database of personal information, as do contracts with the DEA, the IRS, the US Marshal Service. Frank Ahern wrote a great book called The Digital Hitman. His weapons for combating the digital world. It's kind of like those books on how to disappear. And he calls data aggregators sort of the #1 enemy we fight online, because as you know, there's no way to delete our digital footsteps.